May 2001. The damp, cold air enveloped the south bank of the Hudson River, more than 2 miles from the town of Beacon, New York. The beam from forensic technician Ava Moreno's flashlight cut through the thick fog, illuminating the freshly disturbed earth where something no one thought still existed was slowly being uncovered. Control, this is the Hudson excavation team. I need scene support and the coroner's unit here immediately. Her voice echoed over the radio, ringing out amidst the sound of water, lapping and wind whistling across the river's surface. What began as a routine verification of old testimony had now turned into something entirely different, something that would answer questions haunting the town of Beacon for 49 years. In the ground, among decayed roots and wet stones, the investigation team uncovered a long object wrapped in faded silver-gray fabric, its ends bound with old rope. As the cloth was peeled back, human bones came into view, along with a few strands of dark brown hair still clinging to the soil. Nearby, a rusted iron shovel leaned at an angle, its worn wooden handle and mud-caked blade matching the soil samples from the lower Hudson region. This discovery perfectly matched the details in case file hash 1473, a forgotten missing person case from the winter of 1952. The victim's name was Eleanor Hartwell, 27 years old, a clerk at the Dutchess County Courthouse. One January afternoon that year, she left her workplace with a small envelope and never returned. The next morning, her light blue Plymouth Belvedere was found on the Route 9D bridge, door ajar, purse and papers intact, but no sign of her. Her husband, Thomas Greer, a former Air Force pilot, said they had only a minor argument and she went out to clear her head. No one saw Eleanor again. For nearly half a century, Eleanor's disappearance was merely a rumor in the small riverside town. A gray glove, a dried blood stain, and a sealed 1953 file with the cold words, "Unresolved." No foul play detected. But the truth never left the Hudson. It was only waiting for a hand daring enough to reopen that dust-covered envelope. Before continuing this shocking story, please take a second to subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring forgotten cases back into the light and ensures you don't miss any stories in the future. The discovery on the south bank of the Hudson was not just the conclusion of a missing person case. It was the first domino in a chain of events that would expose mistakes, lies, and a crime buried for nearly half a century beneath the cold earth. Because when authorities finally identified a suspect and made an arrest, it wasn't a drifter or an unknown criminal. It was someone Beacon once knew well, someone they trusted, pitied, and who had lived among them for 49 years with an unimaginable secret. The Hartwell case is not just a solved mystery. It is a testament to the perseverance of investigators who refused to let justice gather dust, to the advancements in forensic science that gave a voice to the departed, and to the truth, which no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way back. Tonight we'll return to the winter of 1952, tracing a decades-long search for answers and uncovering the stunning breakthrough, the moment that brought justice back to one of New York's most enigmatic cold cases. This is a story of loss, perseverance, deception, and ultimately, justice delayed but never denied. Inamive, Mida Demed. Inamive, Ifid. To winter. Winter blanketed the town of Beacon, New York, with thick fog creeping along the Hudson River's slopes. The main street, paved with cobblestones, was speckled with snow, and faint yellow streetlights reflected off the icy, muddy water. Life here moved slowly, with little change between seasons. In a red brick house on Main Street, Eleanor Hartwell lived with her husband Thomas Greer and their 4-year-old daughter. At 27, she worked as a clerk for the Dutchess County Courthouse, respected by colleagues for her meticulousness and professionalism. She was often seen arriving earliest and leaving latest, always neatly dressed, carrying a bundle of files carefully tied with ribbon. On the afternoon of January 3rd, as the fog began to thicken, Eleanor folded a few papers, placed them in a small brown envelope, and said goodbye to her colleagues. She mentioned she'd stop by a few places before heading home, her voice steady and unremarkable. Outside, snow began to fall, lightly dusting the hood of the light blue Plymouth Belvedere she drove daily. The car blended into the sparse flow of people leaving the town center, heading south. By early evening, the lights in the Hartwell home were still on, their dim glow filtering through frost-covered windows. In the kitchen, a coffee cup grew cold, Eleanor's heavy coat still hung behind the door, and their daughter had been put to bed early by Thomas as the wind picked up. When the clock passed 9, Thomas grew uneasy. He stepped onto the front porch, peering down the empty street, listening to the sound of falling snow and the rare car passing by. He called 2 of his wife's friends, then her parents in Rhinebeck, but no one knew where Eleanor was. The phone was set down and picked up repeatedly, yielding only brief silences. As the clock neared midnight, Greer pulled on a heavy coat, grabbed his keys, and left the house. The road to the town center was coated in a thin layer of ice, yellow streetlights casting shadows on the snow-swept wind. He stopped at the Beacon police station, where a lone duty light still glowed, stepped inside, and reported that his wife had left the house that afternoon and hadn't returned. Outside, the wind from the Hudson blew harder, carrying dry snowflakes across the road, and the small town sank into the long night of that winter. The report of a missing woman was logged late that night, as snow fell lightly, and the wet streets reflected patrol lights. Police Chief Jack O'Neill, who had served in Beacon for over 2 decades, was still at his desk, a habit during winter when few ventured out in the freezing weather. He looked up as Thomas Greer entered, his face gaunt, breath steaming in the cold. After a few minutes of listening, O'Neill sensed something off in how the man described his wife's disappearance. He stood, pulled on a sweater, and called for 2 on-duty officers, Harold Beck and Frank Miller, to prepare a car and head to the red brick house on Main Street. The road was quiet, with only headlights sweeping through thick snowdrifts. The Hartwell house glowed downstairs. In the living room, everything was orderly. The fireplace still held embers. A porcelain cup sat on the coffee table, a ring of dried black coffee around its rim. Eleanor's heavy coat hung on a hook beside her usual wool hat. In the child's bedroom, the bed was neatly made, a half-open children's book on a chair. There were no signs of disturbance or break-in, windows were locked, and the house keys hung on their rack. Officer Beck noted every detail, while O'Neill circled the house, gently opening the back door to the garden, where only Greer's old snowy footprints were visible. Nothing appeared missing or taken. Everything Eleanor typically carried, purse, papers, coat, was still there. The chief asked Greer when he last saw his wife. Greer said Eleanor came home late that afternoon, still in her work clothes, saying she'd step out to pick up a few things. He didn't ask where, assuming she'd stop at a nearby store. He fed their daughter, cleaned the kitchen, and noticed it was late with no sign of her return. When O'Neill asked if she'd seemed unusual, Greer shook his head. They pressed about friends, family, or connections outside work, but his answers were brief and vague. O'Neill took notes, asking Greer for a recent photo of Eleanor for the report. A Christmas photo was provided. She wore a light-colored coat, a faint smile, and a direct gaze. After completing the initial report, O'Neill called the dispatch center, requesting a search alert for Beacon and nearby towns along the Hudson. The victim's description and details of the light blue Plymouth Belvedere were sent to patrol posts and traffic checkpoints. As they left the house, dawn was nearing, fog blanketing the narrow road to the highway. The chief lingered on the doorstep, watching the light from the Hartwell home still glowing. He knew missing persons cases in this area were often resolved quickly. People returned or were found within days, but this time, staring at the quiet house and the yellow light on the snow, he felt something was wrong, an unusual silence settling over the sleeping town. By noon the next day, the snow had stopped, but fog still hung thick over the Hudson River. Patrol posts around Beacon were ordered to monitor all roads leading out of the area. Around midday, a Dutchess County patrol team reported spotting a car parked askew on the Route 9D bridge toward Cold Spring. It was a long, old steel bridge spanning a narrow section of the river, used mostly by trucks and locals. When officers Beck and Miller arrived, they recognized the light blue Plymouth Belvedere from the previous night's alert. The car sat still by the railing, lightly dusted with snow on its roof and hood, tires sunk into crushed ice at the bridge's edge. The driver's door was slightly ajar, unlocked. Beck opened it gently, the hinges creaking. The interior was freezing, condensation on the windows, leather seats stiff from the cold. On the passenger seat was a brown leather purse, open, containing a small wallet, identification papers, a few receipts, and a courthouse notebook. From a coat draped over the backrest, Beck retrieved a handkerchief packet and a house key with a metal tag engraved 54 Main. The glove box held the car's registration in Eleanor Hartwell's name. Nothing was missing or disturbed. All papers were intact, with only a few snowflakes drifting through the door's gap. Miller noted the odometer at just over 10,000 miles, the gear shift in neutral, and the handbrake disengaged. Under the floor near the seat, a dark, dried stain was visible, its nature unclear. They checked the surroundings. The bridge railing bore faint handprints, snow trampled toward the river's edge, but no signs of a skid or heavy impact. An old glove lay near the rear wheel, empty, with no blood or signs of a struggle. Beck recorded all evidence positions, marking the tires with white paint and photographing the scene with a Polaroid camera. Chief O'Neill arrived shortly after. He surveyed the quiet scene, the dark river below, broken ice drifting slowly. He ordered the scene sealed and called for a tow truck to move the vehicle. Before leaving, O'Neill noted in his book, "No signs of conflict or crime at the scene, door open, belongings intact." The Plymouth was taken to the Beacon police lot, its interior sealed and tagged as evidence, B1473. As the convoy left the bridge, the sun had risen, its weak light reflecting off the snow, leaving dark tire tracks on the cold road. The morning after, the official search plan was launched. Police Chief Jack O'Neill gathered forces at the Beacon Fire Station, including 12 officers, 6 firefighters, and a local civilian patrol group familiar with the Hudson River's terrain. The area was divided into 3 segments: the Route 9D bridge, the north bank stretching toward Cold Spring, and the south bank bordering the old abandoned factory. The Hudson River, in this season, was bitterly cold, its waters heavy with the smell of mud and oil from shipyards. Old wooden boats were mobilized, fitted with spotlights and grappling hooks, with groups of 3 scanning both riverbanks in limited visibility. On the bridge, officers marked the spot where the car was found with paint, measured distances to the railing, and set up temporary barriers to ensure the search team's safety. 2 tracking dogs from Newburgh were brought in. Their handlers let them sniff Eleanor's belongings from her purse before sending them along the snowy western side of the bridge. Each time the dogs paused, officers noted the location, but the trails always ended at the railing's edge. Below, the boat team swept with metal nets, scanning in arcs around the deepest water, about 50 meters from the bridge. By noon, snow turned to light rain, the river grew murky, and strong currents forced a temporary halt to the search. By afternoon, as the wind calmed, Beacon's fire department dive team was called in. Equipped with basic gear, flashlights, guide ropes and anchors, they dived with the current, each session lasting only 10 minutes due to the cold. No body or personal items were found, only stray debris. On the bridge, Officer Beck spotted a gray women's glove caught in a railing gap, damp and dusted with coal ash. A few steps away, Miller noted an 8-inch dark brown streak along a steel beam, dried and darkened under the snow. Samples were collected that day, sealed in glass bags, and sent to the Albany lab. By evening, the entire area was cordoned off, police car lights glaring across the river, and search teams returned to the station in silence. The day's report stated clearly, "Victim not found." Notable evidence includes a gray women's glove and a small unidentified blood stain. 2 days later, when lab results came back, O'Neill received a brief update. The blood was type O, common, and insufficient for identification. The glove bore no clear fingerprints, only dark wool fibers. O'Neill cataloged all evidence, labeled M24 and M25, and ordered continued patrols downstream, anticipating the possibility of a body carried by the current. Yet days passed with no further signs. The Hudson River remained thickly gray, shrouded in dense fog, and the search boats gradually sat idle in their docks, as if the river itself refused to reveal what had happened. 3 days after the Hudson River search paused, Chief O'Neill ordered a thorough re-examination of the Hartwell home. The red brick house on Main Street stood apart from the town center, surrounded by a low wooden fence, with melted snow forming a thin layer of mud on the path. When the investigation team arrived, Thomas Greer was home with his young daughter, looking tired and tense. O'Neill presented a search warrant, asking him and the child to step outside while officers Beck and Miller began documenting each room. The living room remained tidy as before, furniture unmoved, with only a fine layer of dust on the wooden table. They moved to a small study behind the kitchen, where Eleanor often stored courthouse documents. On the desk, among neatly tied stacks of papers, Beck found a pale yellow envelope with handwritten text, "Attorney, confidential." It was open and empty. He noted it, photographed it, and placed it in a sealed bag. The filing cabinet nearby contained only work-related files, nothing unusual. Miller examined the floor near the back door, where light filtered through a thin curtain. In the damp dust, he noticed faint shoe prints leading from the door into the house. The prints were deep, with a herringbone pattern, larger than women's shoes. He measured their size, recorded the stride, and photographed them. Nearby, there were dried mud streaks, dark with tiny moss fibers, likely tracked in from outside. On the windowsill, a small gray fabric thread clung to the wood's edge. Beck collected it with tweezers into a glass vial. In the bedroom, blankets were neatly folded. Eleanor's wardrobe held orderly clothes, with no valuable items missing. In the dresser drawer, they found a small expense notebook, its last entry dated January 2nd. No notes or signs suggested she planned to leave. The upstairs was also checked, revealing no stolen or displaced items. O'Neill noted overall no signs of break-in, but evidence of another person's recent movement. As the team prepared to leave, Miller returned to the kitchen, spotting a small scratch along the wood grain at the table's base, as if something heavy had been dragged across. They measured the spot, photographed it, and continued to the basement door. The basement held old crates, household items, and repair tools. A pair of rubber boots sat by a wooden ladder, their soles caked with dried mud, matching the type found on the house floor. Beck bagged each boot separately, labeling them V32 and V33. After nearly 3 hours, all evidence, the attorney, confidential envelope, mud samples, shoe prints, gray thread, and rubber boots, was photographed, labeled, sealed, and sent to the Beacon Police Evidence Room. O'Neill signed the report, stamping the time. As the team left, the afternoon light filtered through the windows. He glanced back. The house's lights were still on, silent, and sealed as ever. In his personal notes, O'Neill wrote briefly, "No break-in, men's shoe prints, and mud. Strange envelope, contents unknown." For him, in 20 years as a police officer, it was the first time a house held everything intact, yet lacked its most vital piece, its owner. 2 days after the search, Chief O'Neill summoned Thomas Greer to the station for a formal statement. Previously, Greer had given only brief details the night of the report. This time, the interview followed full protocol, with recording and a witness. Greer arrived in a thick gray sweater, face drawn from lack of sleep, his movements slow and thin. He was seated in a small room off the chief's office, with a wooden table, a tape recorder, and 2 metal chairs. O'Neill began with basic questions when his wife left, the state of their relationship, Eleanor's travel habits. Greer spoke evenly, stating that afternoon, after Eleanor came home, she said she'd go buy a few things at a store near Main Street and left without specifics. He said he fed their daughter, cleaned the kitchen, listened to the radio news, and noticed it was nearly 9 o'clock with no sign of her. O'Neill noted this, then asked, "Do you know any stores open that late?" Greer said he wasn't sure. However, police inquiries with the grocery store and gas station on Main Street confirmed no customers came after 8, and no one saw Eleanor. O'Neill asked about her workday. "What time did your wife leave the courthouse?" Greer paused, then said, "Around 5:30. Colleagues' reports stated she left earlier than usual, near 4, with a small envelope." O'Neill marked a red line in his notebook. On the Plymouth, Greer said he didn't leave the house that night and didn't know why the car was on the Route 9D bridge. Officer Beck, who documented the scene, was called in to confirm the car's state: unlocked, headlights on, door ajar. O'Neill asked if Eleanor ever left the car running. Greer replied firmly, "No, she was always careful." The answer hung in the room's silence for a moment. As the interview stretched on, O'Neill noticed a small scratch on Greer's right wrist and a scrape along his left cheek, asked about them. Greer said he slipped while shoveling snow the previous morning. O'Neill noted it, but Beck, who'd seen the yard snow cleared days earlier, remained silent. Per protocol, Greer underwent a basic medical check. Results showed fresh scratches with dried blood. The blood sample was type O, matching the bridge railing sample, but too common to prove anything. In a second interview the next day, O'Neill pressed about the attorney confidential envelope found at home. Greer said he'd never seen it and denied knowing its contents. Asked if Eleanor had legal disputes or side work outside the courthouse, he said, "No, she just did clerical work." O'Neill found Greer's calm demeanor oddly detached, his answers precise but lacking the confusion expected of someone who'd lost a loved one. Police then interviewed neighbors. A woman 2 houses down said she heard a car door slam around 10 p.m., followed by an engine starting, but wasn't sure whose. This contradicted Greer's claim of staying home. Additionally, in his initial statement, he said he called 2 of Eleanor's friends before going to the police. But phone records showed a single call from his house at 11:47 p.m., just before his report. O'Neill saw inconsistencies mounting. Still, there was no direct evidence. The absence of a body prevented a crime classification. In an internal report, he wrote, "Suspect shows inconsistencies in statements, has fresh injuries, and ties to household evidence, but insufficient legal grounds." Greer was released after his statement, required to check in daily with police until the search concluded. In the following days, O'Neill reviewed additional records. Those who knew the Hartwells described Eleanor as kind, reserved, and their family life unremarkable. However, a courthouse colleague recalled Eleanor saying weeks earlier she'd need to sort things out in the new year, without elaboration. From these faint clues, police speculated their marriage might not have been as smooth as it appeared. At a case review meeting, officers agreed Eleanor's voluntary departure was unlikely. There were no signs of preparation, she took no money, clothes, or left notes. All pointed to the last person who saw her, Thomas Greer. But in that era, no forensic techniques could prove lies or identify small blood samples. The case stalled as internal suspicion, without sufficient grounds. Chief O'Neill signed the temporary inquiry closure report, noting privately, "If the truth exists, it's still somewhere in the gaps of the husband's statements." A week after the initial interviews, Chief O'Neill ordered the technical team to reconstruct Eleanor's movements on the day she vanished. The goal was to pinpoint the timeline from leaving home to the Plymouth Belvedere's appearance on the Route 9D bridge. A beacon town map was spread across the station's meeting table, marking 3 main routes from Main Street to the commercial area, from home to the courthouse, and the southern route to the bridge. Colleagues, said Eleanor left the courthouse around 4 p.m. Driving straight home would take 10 minutes, but the car's presence on the bridge, over 3 miles south, didn't align with the timeline. Officer Beck was tasked with retracing the route. He drove from the Hartwell house to the car's discovery point, using a trip meter to calculate time and distance. At an average speed of 25 miles per hour, the route took just over 5 minutes. Beck noted the road was old asphalt, flanked by drainage ditches, with no open dirt or mud, meaning Eleanor's tires couldn't have picked up mud on this route alone. Meanwhile, Miller visited the impound lot where the Plymouth was sealed. Using sampling tools, he scraped mud from the tire treads. Under a magnifying glass, the mud was dark brown with black flecks, mixed with grit and small moss. Compared to samples from the Hartwell doorstep and bridge area, it was distinctly different. Beck suggested checking the South Hudson Bank, where a side road led to an old dock, often wet and muddy. O'Neill approved and organized a survey team. They brought tire mud samples to the South Bank, comparing them to the local soil. Within hours, a visual match was evident. The Albany Evidence Lab confirmed the tire mud matched 90% of the South Hudson Bank soil's mineral composition, shale fragments and organic silt, distinct from Beacon's dry central soil. This proved the car had been in that area before stopping on the bridge. Mapping showed the South Bank route wasn't part of Eleanor's usual work or shopping paths. It was a low-traffic area, mostly trails used by old brick factory workers. Miller noted that driving from the Hartwell house to the South Bank, then back to the bridge, would take about 15 minutes, fitting the unexplained gap in Eleanor's afternoon. This raised O'Neill's question, who drove the car there? In an internal meeting, he presented a hypothetical route. Theory 1. Eleanor drove herself, stopped at the river for personal reasons, and vanished. But this clashed with her leaving all personal items in the car. Theory 2. Someone else drove, passing through the muddy area before staging the car on the bridge. Most officers leaned toward the second. O'Neill ordered a comparison of the mud on the rubber boots from the Hartwell house with the tire samples. The report, returned after 2 days, confirmed matching color, texture, and mineral ratios. Meanwhile, Beck reviewed the weather report for January 3rd. Temperatures hovered around 0 degrees Celsius, with light sleet in the afternoon, dropping to -4 degrees Celsius by evening, enough to dry mud on tires quickly. This explained why the mud held its shape when the car was found the next morning. From this, O'Neill concluded the car was moved after the road dried, likely between 9 and 11 p.m. This matched the time frame Greer couldn't account for beyond claiming he was home with his daughter. When all results were compiled, O'Neill submitted a report to the Dutchess County Prosecutor's Office. In the conclusion, he wrote, physical evidence regarding the route suggests the vehicle was not used in line with the victim's habits. The Route 9D bridge scene is likely staged to simulate an abandoned car. However, without a body or witnesses, the case lacked sufficient elements to establish a crime. The file was held pending, with an internal note, continue monitoring and reviewing the South Bank area, the confirmed starting point of the vehicle's true journey. O'Neill sat back after the meeting, looking at the Beacon map spread on the table. From the small house on Main Street, a red line traced down to the riverbank, then curved up to the Route 9D bridge, ending with a black dot where the car was left. He scribbled a note beside it, unnatural journey, purpose unclear. In his personal notebook, he added a final line. When the map no longer matches reality, someone has redrawn it. In the following week, with the route analysis results filed, Chief Jack O'Neill ordered an expansion of the investigation into civilian entities potentially linked to Eleanor's activities in her final days. The review focused on financial transactions, personal contracts, and places she might have visited based on her weekly routines. At Beacon Trust Bank, records showed that 2 days before her disappearance, Eleanor withdrew $200 in cash from her personal account, a significant sum for her salary, equivalent to nearly half a month's income. O'Neill questioned the teller, who confirmed Eleanor appeared that morning, neatly dressed, showing no signs of haste or anxiety. When asked about the withdrawal's purpose, Eleanor said it was for personal expenses. No records indicated she transferred the money to anyone else. The cash was not found in the house. O'Neill noted, withdrew money, didn't spend it, didn't take it. Purpose unknown. Concurrently, the Dutchess County Archives provided a copy of a life insurance policy Eleanor signed over a year earlier. The beneficiary was listed as Thomas Greer, her husband, with a $5,000 payout, a substantial amount at the time. The policy remained active, with no changes or additional beneficiaries. O'Neill reviewed each clause, noting consistent signatures and handwriting, with no signs of coercion, but added to the report, if the case involves a criminal element, financial gain is noteworthy. Additionally, investigator Harold Beck was tasked with revisiting transaction points or stores Eleanor frequented. In her purse left in the car, there was a January 2nd receipt from Hudson Mills Laundry. Beck and Miller visited the shop, located at a street corner near the old industrial area, where a few steam boilers and warehouses still operated. The owner, Albert Morris, over 60, clearly recalled regular customers. When questioned, he confirmed Eleanor was a weekly patron, typically bringing sheets and towels. He showed police his notebook on January 2nd. Eleanor's order included a gray bedsheet and 2 small towels, picked up and washed the next day. What caught O'Neill's attention was a note beside it, delivered. When asked who collected the items, Morris said it wasn't Eleanor, but a man in his 30s, wearing a green military coat, speaking with a local accent, introducing himself as Greer, her husband. A shop employee corroborated that the man paid in cash, showing no unusual behavior. O'Neill requested a detailed description, height, build, transportation. Morris said the man was about a head taller than Eleanor, with short black hair, driving a light-colored sedan. This matched Thomas Greer. When asked if he'd recognize the man again, Morris nodded, but after a moment's thought, added, I could be mistaken. Lots of people wore those coats, common among ex-military back then. This uncertain testimony led Beck's report to note, witness unsure. Police cross-referenced the delivery date and time with other case timelines. The man collecting for her occurred the morning of January 3rd, when Eleanor was still alive and working. This opened 2 possibilities. Either Thomas picked up the laundry for his wife, or someone else posed as him. Neither led to concrete evidence. There were no cameras, no signed receipts, only the shop owner's account. Beyond the laundry, investigators checked 2 other places Eleanor frequented, the post office and a grocery store. At the post office, staff couldn't recall if they'd seen her that week. At the grocery store, the owner confirmed seeing her buy milk on the afternoon of January 3rd, but wasn't sure if it was before or after leaving the courthouse. Thus, all witness accounts provided only fragmented glimpses, not a cohesive timeline. O'Neill compiled the reports, realizing the picture grew detailed but lacked a connecting thread. Eleanor withdrew money but didn't spend it, sent laundry but didn't retrieve it, her car appeared where she never went, and her husband, the only one who could explain, denied all involvement. He submitted the report to the Dutchess County Prosecutor's Office with a brief conclusion. No additional evidence proves criminal activity. Current data suggests possible interference with the missing person, but the form remains undetermined. As the meeting ended, O'Neill gazed out his office window toward the distant Hudson River dock. Shrouded in fog, he knew the case was nearing a dead end. The clues gathered over 2 weeks: mud, shoe prints, an empty envelope, a glove, conflicting statements were like puzzle pieces that didn't fit, part of a half-erased picture. Each attempt to connect them revealed another gap. In his personal notebook, he wrote, "All traces point to one person, but it's still not enough to charge. Between the missing and the one left behind, the only certainty is silence." By the winter of 1953, Eleanor Hartwell's disappearance had lingered unresolved for a full year. All investigative avenues were explored and quietly closed. Chief Jack O'Neill, who pursued the case from the start, sat in his office in mid-January, facing a file over 200 pages thick. Statements, scene photos, search logs, lab results, all ending with the repeated phrase, insufficient grounds. Reports sent to Albany received similar conclusions from the Dutchess County prosecutor, stating no clear criminal elements warranted further pursuit. The investigation was recommended for suspension. Per NYPD protocol, all evidence was inventoried one last time before storage. The evidence room logged a gray fabric scrap from the Hartwell home, photographed mud and shoe prints, a gray women's glove, blood from the Route 9D bridge railing, and 2 small bone fragments found during river sweeps, their origin unidentified. All were sealed in thick paper bags, marked with red tape, labeled case hash 1473. Beck and Miller signed the sealing confirmation, with O'Neill adding the final stamp before transfer to Albany's cold case archive. In the summary report, O'Neill wrote briefly, "No witnesses, no body, no conclusive forensic identification. Current hypothesis, victim fell into the river or left voluntarily, cause undetermined." In his personal notes, he added, "Physical signs suggest the vehicle was moved, and the scene may have been staged. Likely suspect remains the husband." The small slanted text wasn't included in the official file. As the file was transferred, the Hartwell house was temporarily sealed. Thomas Greer and his daughter left Beacon, moving to live with her maternal family in Albany. Neighbors stopped mentioning Eleanor, and the Route 9D bridge returned to normal with slow truck traffic. A local paper ran a brief note on page 3. Hartwell disappearance yields no new results. No one wrote more. In February, O'Neill signed the order to suspend the investigation, forwarding it to the Dutchess County prosecutor and NYPD's Central Archives. Case hash 1473 joined over 200 unresolved cases from that decade in the cold case catalog. The final steel drawer held thick envelopes, numbered and neatly stacked, unnoticed. Before handing over the file, O'Neill reviewed the evidence list one last time. The cold numbers, codes, and ink marks reminded him of the lit house, the cold coffee cup, and the coat still hanging by the door. A year of investigation, dozens of reports, hundreds of search hours, all summed up in 3 words, could not identify. That afternoon, after signing the final paper, he closed his personal notebook and placed it in his desk drawer. Outside, the Hudson River bore a thin ice layer, winter light fading on its surface. In the official report, he wrote the final line, "Hartwell case suspended due to lack of direct evidence." But in his mind, another thought lingered. The case wasn't over, just buried under the thick snow like everything else in Beacon's winter that year. Nearly half a century passed since Eleanor Hartwell's file was stored as cold case hash 1473. Over that time, generations of officers retired, Albany's archive grew yearly, and Beacon's disappearance became a footnote in old records. Not until early 2001, when the New York State Police launched the Cold Case DNA Initiative, a program to reanalyze biological evidence from unsolved cases, did the Hartwell file resurface. The initiative aimed to review cases with intact sealed evidence, using new DNA profiling technology capable of extracting and identifying samples even decades old. Among over 2,000 files transferred to Albany for review, hash 1473 was randomly selected for the first batch. Technician Ava Moreno, with nearly a decade in NYPD's forensic unit, handled the case. Opening the old digital database, she noted the evidence status, paper sealed, well preserved, no signs of damage. This was rare, as most 1950s evidence bags had rotted or molded. Ava requested permission to inspect the physical items. That afternoon, in the basement archive, she and 2 colleagues opened Steel Cabinet 47, housing 1949-1955 files. Inside, large paper envelopes were neatly stacked, each with a red seal and faded signatures. Ava found hash 1473 between two others. Its seal was intact, bearing J. O'Neill's clear signature. She logged its condition, photographed it, and took it to the biosafety lab. Upon unsealing, Ava found 3 small packets, a folded gray fabric scrap, a glass tube with dried mud and soil, and a small glass vial labeled blood sample. Attached paperwork noted the blood came from the bridge railing during the initial January 1952 search, unanalyzed since. A blue ink note read, Group O, no ID. Ava carefully unfolded the gray fabric under inspection light. A dark brown stain covered part of its surface, clearly dried organic matter, still vibrant. The thick wool, coarse and moisture-retaining, likely preserved DNA better than thinner fabrics. Ava filled out an internal form, sample well-preserved, high potential for DNA extraction. She knew recovering biological traces from old evidence was difficult, but intact samples offered a strong chance. Comparing it to other period artifacts, she noted hash 1473 was among the few with complete original evidence. Most others had only photo logs. This made Hartwell a prime candidate for the initiative's trial phase. She submitted a formal proposal to the forensics chief. Request permission to analyze DNA from blood and fabric samples in cold case hash 1473, Beacon, 1952. In her memo, Ava cited reasons: intact evidence, 2 distinct samples suitable for modern analysis, potential to identify victims, suspect or rule out old theories. 3 days later, the request was approved. Before transferring the samples, Ava conducted a final check, logging all details. Using an optical microscope, she found 2 fiber types on the fabric, dominant gray fibers and darker ones, possibly hair or clothing threads. She resealed them in a moisture-proof bag, coating it. Specimen 1473A. The bridge blood vial was coded 1473B. Both were sent in a specialized cold box to the New York State Forensic Institute's DNA lab in Albany for STR analysis, a then new method for extracting and amplifying gene sequences from tiny samples. Before finalizing the transfer report, Ava reviewed the Hartwell paper file. The yellowed reports, with faded typewriter text, detailed a woman who vanished nearly half a century ago. On the first page, under Missing Person Report, January 1952, O'Neill's handwritten note read, "No evidence of voluntary departure." The brief remark made her pause. By day's end, Ava returned the empty file envelope to the shelf, tagging it, "Under analysis. Do not remove." She closed her notebook and emailed confirmation that Hartwell's evidence was sent for testing. As she left, fluorescent lights reflected off the steel cabinet, where hundreds of other files lay under time's dust. None knew that reopening an old paper envelope, meant for mere archiving, was about to spark a chain of events that would reshape understanding of Beacon's decades-old disappearance. At Albany's forensic lab, analysis of hash 1473 samples began in the second week of March, 2001. The team, 3 technicians specializing in ancient DNA, was supervised by Dr. Daniel Moore. They received 2 sealed samples from Ava Moreno, the gray fabric 1473A, and the blood vial 1473B. Both were opened in a high-level sterile room to avoid contamination. The initial extraction targeted the fabric's brown stain. A small fiber section was cut and treated with an enzyme solution to isolate residual epithelial cells. After 48 hours, results showed a DNA sequence long enough for amplification. Under a microscope, technicians confirmed human DNA from 2 sources, predominantly female, with a smaller male component. A preliminary report was sent to Ava Moreno, who closely monitored the analysis. With years of experience, she recognized this as a breakthrough. Biological samples rarely remained intact after 50 years. But the paper sealing had prevented mold, preserving genetic structure. To verify, Ava requested further extraction from the 1473B blood vial for comparison. The second sample was minimal, but STR short tandem repeat technology, yielded a complete profile after 5 days. Analysis confirmed the bridge blood and the female fabric DNA came from the same individual, with 99.98% accuracy. The next challenge was identifying the DNA's owner. Since the victim disappeared in 1952, no national database held her profile. Ava contacted Dutchess County's Civil Records Unit to locate living relatives of Eleanor Hartwell. Records revealed a niece, Mary Ann Caldwell, born 1956, daughter of Eleanor's younger brother. After explaining the purpose, Mary Ann agreed to provide a cheek swab. The sample was sent to Albany for comparison. Results confirmed a first-degree familial match, with 99.97% similarity, verifying the female DNA as Eleanor Hartwell's. The official report signed March 18, 2001, confirmed the victim's identity. However, the gray fabric also yielded a second DNA sample, with EA chromosome markers, indicating a male. Though minimal, STR analysis produced a complete profile. Ava cross-checked New York's criminal database, finding no match. Reviewing the 1952 file, she noted Thomas Greer's Air Force service, suggesting his biometric records might exist in military archives. She sent a formal request to the Department of Defense Archives for his medical blood sample. 2 weeks later, data arrived. Greer's DNA matched the male DNA on the fabric, with a 1-in-6.7- billion accuracy. A 20-page forensic report was sent from Albany to NYPD. In the conclusion, Dr. Moore wrote, "Sample #1473A contains DNA from 2 individuals, female and male. This biological combination rules out random coincidence. The blood and male epithelial cells indicate direct contact at the same time. These data confirm this is a homicide, not a voluntary disappearance." Ava read the report multiple times before signing the results transfer memo. On April 2, 2001, the New York State Police issued an official notice to reopen case #1473 with a new status. Homicide investigation, reopened. Ava Moreno was appointed as the forensic coordinator for the case. During an internal meeting in Albany, investigators were informed that this was one of the first 3 cold cases successfully revived through mixed DNA analysis. The results silenced the room. On the projector screen, a scan of the gray fabric appeared alongside 2 parallel genetic profiles, one for Eleanor, one for Thomas. No further explanation was needed. Everyone understood that this match meant the husband from years past was the critical link. O'Neill had long since passed, but his name lingered on the old reports. His note, "Possible staging of crime scene," serving as a warning across time. Reading it, Ava felt a strange connection between generations of investigators, those who carried on to complete an unfinished truth. She sent a copy of the results to the Dutchess County Prosecutor's Office to consider resuming a criminal investigation. In the compiled report, Ava wrote, "DNA analysis from original evidence in case #1473 confirms victim Eleanor Hartwell died due to criminal activity. Male DNA fully matches Thomas Greer, the victim's husband. Recommend reopening investigation as intentional homicide." The line concluded the technical note, but opened a new path for a case thought dormant for nearly half a century. By late April, the prosecutor's office formally notified NYPD and the Beacon Police Department. The order to reopen the case was signed, mandating a review of all witnesses, evidence, and old data. In the new electronic archive system, #1473 was marked in red, reopened 2001. A special investigation team was formed to proceed with the next steps, re-verify the entire context, gather additional evidence, and assess prosecution feasibility. For Ava Moreno, her initial task was complete, proving that the 1952 Beacon disappearance was not a natural mystery, but the remnant of a crime concealed under dust and paperwork for 49 years. After the DNA results were confirmed, NYPD's Special Investigation Team began reviewing all evidence in case #1473 to trace the origin of each physical detail, potentially linking directly to the suspect. The focus was the gray fabric from the Hartwell home, initially deemed insignificant. In the new forensic report, Ava noted the fabric was woven from cotton-wool blend, with uniform thread density, a twill weave, and a subtle mesh pattern, a common industrial product in the early 1950s, often used for bedsheets or furniture lining. From a faint logo on the edge, the team deciphered Hudson Mills Company, Poughkeepsie, New York. This became the first clue of the new investigation phase. Beacon and Poughkeepsie, just 15 miles apart along the Hudson River, meant O'Neill and his colleagues likely overlooked this detail. For Ava, it was a concrete lid. She contacted the state's industrial archives to locate records of Hudson Mills, the region's largest textile factory in the post-war era. Records showed it produced various household fabrics, supplying retailers like Beacon Hardware, the town's largest material and household goods store at the time. An investigator was sent to Poughkeepsie to access the factory's remaining archives, now defunct, with only a few ledgers stored at the local library. Among yellowed invoices, they found December 1951 delivery receipts listing retail customers. Item 27 read, Beacon Hardware Company. 25 rolls cotton gray sheeting, code 482. This matched the fabric's weave pattern. The team then went to Beacon to retrieve the store's retail records. Beacon Hardware had changed owners, but the new owner kept some old documents in the basement. Under oilcloth-covered boxes, they found a 1951 ledger, brown leather-bound, handwritten. On the 11th line of December's pages, it read, sold 2 yards cotton gray Hudson Mills, T. Greer, cash payment. Transaction date, December 20th, 1951. The small, black ink entry, just 2 weeks before Eleanor's disappearance, included invoice number 453B and the seller's signature, confirming hand delivery. Ava received the report in early May. She reviewed Thomas Greer's profile, former Air Force serviceman, discharged in 1947, briefly employed at a Beacon mechanic shop. No evidence suggested he dealt in textiles or household goods. The purchase of 2 yards of sheeting was unusual, especially since the same fabric was later found with Eleanor's blood. In an internal memo, Ava wrote, fabric origin matches order purchased by Thomas Greer at Beacon Hardware in December 1951. Indirect evidence proves the suspect's legal possession of the material used at the scene. The team established a chain of evidence. Hudson Mills factored Beacon Hardware store customer Thomas Greer fabric found in the Hartwell home. This chain was tight enough to support a warrant to search Greer's current residence in Albany. To ensure legality, the Dutchess County prosecutor required confirmation that Thomas Greer was still alive at his registered address. Civil records showed he moved to Albany in 1960, now retired, living alone in a suburban home near Washington Avenue Extension. Before filing the warrant, Ava compiled a 12-page report detailing the evidence tracing process. In the conclusion, she wrote, Hudson Mills Fabric Code 482, produced December 1951, was exclusively distributed to Beacon Hardware. Invoice 453B confirms Thomas Greer as the buyer. Victim Eleanor Hartwell's and suspect Greer's DNA were identified on the same material. Request court permission to search the residence for additional related evidence. On May 8, 2001, the prosecutor approved the request, submitting it to the Albany County Court. The search warrant was issued 2 days later, valid statewide in New York. The court's rationale stated, reasonable grounds exist that physical evidence related to the 1952 homicide may still be present at Thomas Greer's residence. Ava received a copy of the warrant with the special investigation team, led by Lieutenant Raymond Ellis. They planned the execution for the following week, coordinating with Albany local police to ensure safety and confidentiality. All actions were to be conducted discreetly to avoid community attention. At the final briefing, Ava looked at a 1951 black and white photo of Eleanor, enlarged in the file, her face calm, eyes fixed on the lens. She placed it beside the yellowed Beacon Hardware invoice, its black ink still legible with T. Greer. 2 papers, one from wartime, one modern, now sat side by side on her desk, linking two halves of a story buried for nearly half a century. Signing the preparation memo for the search warrant, Ava knew this wasn't just the next investigative step, but the final chance to answer a disappearance long forgotten along the cold Hudson. On the morning of May 16, 2001, NYPD's Special Investigation Team, with Albany local police, executed the court-ordered search at Thomas Greer's home. The house, in a quiet western Albany suburb, had brown brick walls, a low roof, and was surrounded by old pines and a wide lawn. Greer, now in his 70s, lived alone since his daughter moved out of state. As the police convoy stopped at the gate, he was watering plants, thin, with white hair, wearing a dark sweater. The warrant was read clearly. Greer didn't object, standing silently before being asked to sit in the living room while the team worked. The house was divided into 3 areas: the ground floor with living room and kitchen, a basement for old storage, and an attic rarely used. The team split to cover each. The living room was tidy but dated. On a shelf among dozens of frames and mementos, no photos of Eleanor were present. Ava Moreno, handling evidence logging, noticed a small wooden box on a low cabinet near the fireplace, its paint peeling. She opened it, finding old documents, a marriage certificate, their daughter's birth certificate, yellowed bills, and an insurance card naming Eleanor Hartwell Greer as the insured. This matched the original case file's policy. The box's lock was broken, its inner edge stained with dark brown paint, like an old handprint. Ava, gloved, photographed it, and sealed it in an evidence bag. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Raymond Ellis and 2 officers searched the basement, filled with dusty cartons and old items. In the east corner, they found a wooden rack holding garden tools, shovels, hose, and a metal bucket. A large iron shovel, its wooden handle cracked and blade heavily rusted, stood alone in a plastic bin. When Ellis lifted it, dark brown dried soil clung to the edge. He ordered a technician to collect a sample for analysis. The rack also held a 2-meter roll of gray fabric, tied with coarse rope, matching the pattern and material of the case hash, 1,473 evidence. The roll and shovel were sealed on site, labeled A01 and A02. Further inspection in the basement corner revealed a low wooden crate containing old items, a military coat, rope, and a folder of Thomas's Air Force personal records, time-stamped to his 1947 discharge. All were photographed, labeled, and sealed per protocol. While moving evidence, Ava noted a damp soil smell around the rack, similar to the mud soil mix from the Plymouth's tires years ago. She collected a basement floor soil sample for comparative testing. Returning to the living room, Ava asked Greer about the basement fabric roll. He replied curtly that it was old upholstery fabric bought to patch a sofa. Asked about its origin, he said he wasn't sure. Bought in Beacon long ago, don't recall where. His short, flat, emotionless answers cast a cold atmosphere over the process. By noon, the team completed evidence collection, the wooden box, fabric roll, shovel, and soil sample. Greer signed a receipt confirming no items were misidentified. All evidence was sent to Albany's forensic lab that day. Preliminary results returned 3 days later. The shovel's soil matched the mineral composition and color of the South Hudson Bank soil, where the Plymouth was confirmed to have traveled before being abandoned. Microscopic analysis showed the soil contained water moss and wet plant matter unique to Beacon's riverside. The fabric roll from Greer's home matched the original evidence fiber structure, dye, and Hudson Mills Code 482. The fingerprint lab also reported. On the wooden box's inner lid, containing Eleanor's documents, they found 2 clear prints. One was Eleanor's, identified via her marriage file. The other was Thomas Greer's, fully matching his military records. The overlapping prints confirmed both had handled the box. Ava noted, cannot rule out the box being retained after the victim's disappearance. That afternoon, the Dutchess County prosecutor signed an urgent summons for Thomas Greer to appear for questioning the next morning at Albany Police Headquarters. Receiving the summons, Greer didn't resist, but his eyes showed fatigue, his hands trembling slightly. An accompanying officer reported he seemed to understand why he was called. As the team left, Albany's sky was overcast, light rain beginning. Ava glanced through the car window at the sealed fabric roll and shovel in the evidence crate. Nearly half a century later, these mute objects held answers Beacon's town couldn't find. With the new evidence, the chain closed. DNA, material origins, fingerprints, and soil all pointed to one person. In the day's final report, Ava's conclusion was concise. Sufficient legal grounds exist to arrest Thomas Greer as the primary suspect in Eleanor Hartwell's homicide. On the morning of May 17, 2001, Thomas Greer appeared at Albany Police Headquarters per the summons. The small interrogation room held a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a recorder in the corner. Lieutenant Raymond Ellis led the session, with forensic technician Ava Moreno present to document. Greer appeared calm, his voice steady, as if prepared for the questions. He was read his legal rights and acknowledged the presence of a court-appointed lawyer. After formalities, Ellis opened the file, presenting the evidence: DNA results, fabric origin, matching fingerprints, and soil analysis from the shovel. Greer sat silently, nodding slightly at his name. After nearly an hour of detailing the evidence, Ellis asked directly, "Do you want to recount the events of the evening of January 3, 1952? Greer paused long, then said softly, "Yes." He began with a near whisper, his aged voice hoarse. "We had an argument." Ellis signaled a technician to take notes. Greer recounted that Eleanor came home later than usual that night. When she entered, he asked where she'd been. She replied coldly that she went out to clear her head. The conversation grew tense when Greer asked about her bank withdrawal and the envelope she carried. Eleanor evaded, then said she'd visit her brother in Rhinebeck for a few days. Greer admitted he grew angry, believing she planned to leave the family. In the heat of the moment, they argued loudly in the kitchen. When Ellis pressed for details, Greer paused, then said slowly, "She was going to leave. I grabbed her arm, she pulled away. I pushed her hard. She fell, her head hit the stair edge." He bowed his head, hands clenched. Ellis asked, "Did you check if she was alive?" Greer said he knelt, called her name repeatedly, but she didn't respond. Blood flowed from the back of her head. He didn't know what to do. Realizing she was dead, he panicked, couldn't think. Ellis let him sit in silence, then asked, "What did you do next?" Greer said he wrapped the body in a gray sheet from the basement fabric cabinet, tied it with rope, and carried it to the car. He drove out after his daughter was asleep, heading south along the river. At a plot near the South Hudson bank, on a trail near the water, he stopped, dug a shallow grave with a shovel, and buried the body. He returned home, changed his coat, and the next morning drove the car to the Route 9D bridge to stage the scene. When Ellis asked why he chose this, Greer said he wanted people to think she left. The room fell silent, only the recorder's hum audible. Ava noted in the report, "Voluntary confession confirms physical altercation leading to death. Describes burial site near South Hudson Bank, 2 miles from Beacon." When Ellis asked again for the exact location, Greer said he remembered. "Near the old dock, by a large oak on the dirt path, where there's a flat stone like a step." He used the shovel found at his home to dig, covering it with damp soil and dry leaves. Ellis asked him to draw a map. Greer's hand trembled, but sketched a simple diagram from the trail. Turn left past 2 trees, about 30 yards from the water's edge. After the map was completed, Ellis reviewed the full statement for confirmation. Greer nodded, signing each page. Ava sealed the sketch and interrogation transcript in the file. Ellis left to call the Dutchess County prosecutor, reporting that the confession identified the burial site and murder weapon. The agency immediately prepared to request a search warrant for the Riverside area per the suspect's directions. Before ending the session, Ellis asked, "Why speak now?" Greer replied slowly, eyes on the table. Because it all comes back eventually. I thought I'd take it with me, but no one escapes." He said no more. The interrogation ended at 3 p.m. Thomas Greer was placed in temporary custody for the investigation. The report noted, suspect voluntarily admitted to causing death in an altercation, disclosed the victim's burial location on the South Hudson Bank, provided an illustrative map, and signed confirmation. Ava Moreno signed the final section, time-stamping 1508, May 17, 2001. Leaving the room, she held the rough sketches copy, its thin, trembling pencil lines, mapping a place the Hudson River had silently hidden, a truth no one wanted to find. On the morning of May 20, 2001, 3 days after the interrogation, the New York State Police forensic team, along with the Special Investigation Unit, was authorized to conduct an excavation at the location Thomas Greer had indicated in his confession. The site was on the south bank of the Hudson River, about 2 miles from downtown Beacon, near an abandoned dock once part of an old brick factory. It was a low-lying area, dense with oak and birch trees, rarely visited. A narrow trail led close to the water's edge, through waist-high weeds. Despite nearly half a century, the terrain matched Greer's sketch, altered only by time and new sediment. That morning, the sky was overcast, with thick fog blanketing the river. The area was cordoned off within a 100-meter radius, secured with yellow tape and guards at both ends of the road. Ava Moreno was present to oversee technical aspects, joined by Dr. David Lasker, a forensic osteology expert. They started at the marked point Greer described, about 30 yards from the water, near a large oak and a flat stone like a step. 2 technicians measured the area, using a metal detector and ground-penetrating radar to identify anomalies. After 15 minutes, the radar showed an oval-shaped reflection about 60 centimeters deep, precisely at the distance from the oak in Greer's drawing. The excavation team began with small tools to avoid damaging materials. The topsoil was carefully removed, each shovelful spread on a tarp, and sifted for foreign objects. About 2 hours later, at just over half a meter deep, a dark gray fabric edge appeared, embedded in wet soil. The thick, bedsheet-like material was wrapped tightly around a hard object. Dr. Lasker signaled a pause, requesting photos and a report. As more soil was cleared, the shape of a 1.6-meter-long bundle emerged, rounded at the top and tapering at the bottom, characteristic of a long-decomposed human body. A faint but distinct odor of damp soil, mixed with organic matter, rose. When the top of the bundle was uncovered, they found old rope wrapped twice around the fabric. The rope rotted, broke with a light tug. Half the fabric was opened, revealing a skull and right arm bones. The bones were dry, yellowish-brown, with some ribs and teeth still in place. A few short brown hairs clung to the gray wool fibers. Ava documented, photographed from all angles, and coded the new evidence. Specimen 1470, the remains were fully extracted after nearly 5 hours. The rest of the sheet, opened, showed intact seams with no cuts or tears from external force. Soil samples around the body were collected to compare with the shovel sample from Greer's home. Once placed in a preservation bag, the remains were transported to Albany's forensic lab. The excavation site was marked and covered, pending further inspection. The field report stated, "Discovered human-shaped bundle, wrapped in gray sheeting, tied with rope, excavated at suspect's indicated location, 32 yards southeast of the large oak from the water's edge." In Albany, examination began that night. Dr. Lasker and his osteology team cleaned and arranged the skeletal structure. They determined the remains were female, aged approximately 25-30, about 1.63 meters tall, matching Eleanor Hartwell's original description. The right side of the skull had a 5.2 centimeters crack and a slight frontal indentation, indicating trauma from a hard impact. No other injuries were found on the neck or limbs. The preliminary report suggested death likely resulted from brain hemorrhage due to the head injury. Concurrently, the forensic dental unit compared Eleanor's 1951 dental records from the county court. A silver-filled molar on the right matched the file. A full comparison of 16 dental markers showed 100% consistency. For absolute confirmation, Ava sent bone marrow and hair samples to Albany's DNA lab to compare with Marianne Caldwell's reference sample from the case reopening. 4 days later, results showed a 99.9997% match, confirming the remains as Eleanor Hartwell's. The official report, signed on May 26, 2001, stated, "The body excavated on the South Hudson Bank Beacon jurisdiction is that of victim Eleanor Hartwell, missing since January 1952. Evidence of death by closed head trauma, consistent with suspect Thomas Greer's confession. Accompanying evidence, gray sheeting, rope, soil and hair, was stored in the evidence vault." Reading the report, Ava Moreno noted in her log, "Burial time and location fully matched the suspect's sketch. The site was undisturbed, indicating concealment for nearly half a century." These findings, with field photos, DNA samples, and verification records, were sent to the Dutchess County prosecutor, identifying the victim and confirming the cause of death, consistent with the confession, closed the most critical forensic phase of the 49-year investigation. That afternoon, the team returned to the riverside to clear the site. The cordon tape was removed, and crime scene signs were taken down. Late daylight spread over the Hudson, quietly reflecting off the dug and refilled patch. There, the remnants of the 1952 case became clear evidence, restoring the identity of a forgotten woman. The trial for State of New York via Thomas Greer opened on the morning of March 12, 2002, at Albany County Supreme Court. It was the state's oldest cold case brought to trial with DNA evidence at its core. Outside, a small group of local reporters waited, aware this case highlighted the Cold Case DNA Initiative's success. Inside, courtroom 3 was packed. The gallery included prosecutors, forensic staff, and a few of Eleanor Hartwell's relatives. At the defendant's bench, Thomas Greer, now 72, sat silently in an old gray suit, his gaze distant, face drawn. He was assigned public defender Jane Holbrook, experienced in complex criminal cases. The trial spanned 10 days, presided over by Judge Harold Kinsey. On day 1, prosecutor Michael Rourke presented the indictment. Defendant Thomas Greer is charged with second-degree murder under Section 125.25 of New York penal law, related to the death of his wife, Eleanor Hartwell, in January 1952. He emphasized that, despite nearly half a century, the physical evidence was sufficient to prove intentional killing. On day 2, the prosecution introduced the physical evidence chain, starting with DNA analysis. Technician Ava Moreno testified first, detailing the sample extraction process from the gray fabric and old blood, cross-referencing with Greer's military records and the victim's relative's sample. Genetic charts displayed on screen showed perfect matches. When asked about potential error, Ava replied, 1 in 6 billion, meaning no chance of random coincidence. The courtroom fell silent for a moment. On day 3, Dr. David Lasker, head of forensic osteology, described the excavation. He detailed finding the remains on the South Hudson Bank, wrapped in gray sheeting, matching the 1951 Beacon hardware purchase, with dental and DNA analysis, confirming Eleanor Hartwell's identity. Asked about the cause of death, he read from the report, brain trauma from a hard impact, consistent with the suspect's description of a fall during an altercation. A photo showed the remains, tilted, wrapped in faded fabric, rope around the shoulders. Some in the courtroom held their breath. On day 4, the prosecution presented additional physical evidence, the fabric roll from Greer's home, the old shovel, the wooden box with Eleanor's documents, and fingerprint results. Technical findings confirmed the shovel's soil matched the excavation site, and Greer's fingerprints overlapped Eleanor's on the box. Rourke concluded, the evidence not only places the defendant at the scene, but proves he directly handled the victim's body. Defense attorney Holbrook began on day 5, acknowledging the evidence linked Greer to the scene, but arguing it was not intentional murder, but an accident during an argument. She read Greer's confession. He admitted immediately during questioning, honestly describing the events, stating the death was unintended. Holbrook argued that concealing the body was wrong, but not indicative of premeditated crime. She urged the court to consider the time elapsed, the defendant's age, and his psychological state then. On days 6 and 7, the prosecution countered, arguing that hiding the body and staging the car on the Route 9D bridge showed intent after realizing the consequences. Rourke told the jury, "Someone who accidentally causes a death seeks help, not buries their wife and fabricates a disappearance." He displayed the route map and fabric purchase records, suggesting premeditation. On day 8, Greer testified at the defense's request. He took the stand slowly, hands trembling, voice hoarse. "I was wrong, and I've lived with that mistake for 50 years. I didn't mean to kill her," we argued, "and I lost control." The prosecution asked, "Did you know you buried your wife's body and lied for half a century?" Greer, head bowed, said, "I know. But back then, I thought I'd lost everything." The courtroom was still. On day 9, both sides gave closing arguments. Rourke stressed, DNA, physical evidence, and consistent confession confirmed Thomas Greer caused his wife's death and deliberately concealed it. This is not an accident, but second-degree murder. Holbrook, in closing, requested leniency, citing the circumstances and Greer's cooperation and confession. On the final day, the 12-person jury entered deliberations. After nearly 6 hours, they returned. Judge Kinsey asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The 4-person stood, "Your Honor, we have." Silence fell as the verdict was read. Defendant Thomas Greer is found guilty of second-degree murder. That afternoon, the court issued the sentence. Judge Kinsey read slowly. Considering the defendant's actions caused the death of victim Eleanor Hartwell, with intentional concealment of the crime, the court sentences the defendant to 25 years imprisonment under Section 70.00 of New York penal law. In his rationale, he said, "Though nearly half a century has passed, justice must still be served." As the sentence was read, Greer nodded slightly. He showed no reaction, only looking at his hands. In the gallery, Marianne Caldwell, Eleanor's only living niece, cried. Ava Moreno, seated nearby, remained silent. After years, the numbers, samples, and DNA strands became the final voice of a woman buried in silence. On March 22, 2002, the sentence was officially signed. State Fed. Greer entered New York's legal records as one of the rare cold cases fully resolved through DNA and original evidence. The trial's final note read, "Eleanor Hartwell case closed." But for those involved, it felt less like closure and more like an eerie calm, as if the Hudson that spring paused for a moment, bidding farewell to a story emerging from history's shadows. In June 2002, 2 months after the state of New York Fed, Thomas Greer's sentence took effect. The New York State Police and NYPD jointly completed a comprehensive operational report on the Hartwell case. The 180-page document included investigation summaries, forensic analysis, and recommendations for handling long-standing cases. It opened with the Eleanor Hartwell case, clearly demonstrates the value of proper evidence preservation and the potential for recovering biological data in modern conditions. This case sets a precedent for how a 1952 disappearance was proven a homicide through DNA analysis after nearly half a century. In the forensic analysis section, NYPD experts noted that all #1473 evidence was sealed in thick, 1950 S-era craft paper. This dry, breathable, non-plastic packaging prevented mold and bacterial growth, preserving DNA nearly intact. A report segment stated, "A seemingly outdated storage method became the best evidence protector." Thanks to meticulous documentation by officers like Chief Jack O'Neill, from sample collection to signed seals, modern forensics could trace evidence origins without breaking the chain of custody. The report also highlighted the 1952 investigation's main flaw: blood samples from the Route 9D bridge railing were only tested for blood type, not further analyzed for mechanical or biological markers. Lacking equipment and DNA concepts then, the samples were deemed valueless and stored for administrative comparison. Had modern DNA extraction existed, the case could have been solved in the 1950s. The report noted, the error was not human capability but technological limits. Storing samples without DNA intent became the foundation for later resolution. In the operational section, experts praised Ava Moreno's cold case retrieval process as a model for the Cold Case DNA Initiative. Her steps, checking seal conditions, cross-referencing evidence codes, extracting old data, and proposing re-examination, were detailed for forensic technician training curricula. The report quoted her proposal, "No case is truly closed when evidence persists." This became the unofficial motto of the state's cold case program. The report also detailed the process of analyzing mixed DNA samples in the Hartwell case, including extracting STR sequences from old fabric, amplifying genes at low temperatures, comparing the female sample with a relative's reference, and matching the male sample to military records. The report confirmed that the results met international accuracy standards and recommended applying this process to cases lacking direct DNA evidence. In the investigative assessment section, the expert team praised the Albany Special Investigation Unit's ability to connect forensic data with historical records. Tracing the Hudson Mills fabric and the Beacon hardware purchase invoice was deemed an outstanding example of reconstructing an indirect evidence chain. The report also dedicated a section to honor past officers, particularly Jack O'Neill, the first to suspect a staged crime scene. His brief notebook conclusion was quoted verbatim in the report's introduction. At the results announcement meeting, an NYPD representative emphasized that the Hartwell case became a model for the state's criminal investigation training system. Starting in 2003, trainees at the New York State Police Academy studied a module titled Case #1473, Beacon 1952, using the full case file, reports, scene photos, and DNA analyses as a practical exercise in evidence tracing, scene reconstruction, and operational error evaluation. In its conclusion, the report stated, the Hartwell case demonstrates the value of three factors: proper storage, evidence chain preservation, and investigator persistence. If any of these had been absent, this case would have remained forgotten beneath the Hudson. The document was stamped NYPD reference case and distributed internally to investigative units statewide. When Ava Moreno signed the report's final page, she wrote in the margin, proper sealing, full signatures, dry storage, the smallest things sometimes preserve the voice of the lost. For her, the Hartwell case was not just a solved file, but proof that in investigations, time does not erase truth, it only waits for someone patient enough to reopen an old envelope and listen. In October 2002, the Eleanor Hartwell case was formally presented at the National Forensic Conference in Washington, D.C., under the session Cold Case and DNA Evidence Recovery. New York's representative, forensic technician Ava Moreno, delivered the presentation titled Case #1473, The Beacon Cold Case, DNA Across Half a Century. Before an audience of hundreds of investigators, forensic experts, and prosecutors from across the U.S., Ava detailed the evidence recovery process, extracting DNA from nearly half-century-old paper-sealed samples, and the investigation chain from archive to trial. When she displayed the gray fabric scan and the perfectly aligned DNA profiles of victim and suspect, the room fell silent. Concluding, Ava said simply, "We didn't bring anyone back, but we gave them their name back." The presentation received prolonged applause, and the Hartwell case was immediately selected as one of the 4 best case studies of the year at the conference. National media quickly covered the story. The New York Times, Albany Journal, and Forensic Science Weekly published articles calling it one of the most significant cold cases in New York judicial history. Many highlighted how it not only resolved a family tragedy, but marked a turning point in applying DNA technology to long-standing cases. CBS's 48 Hours aired a special episode, The Hudson Secret, reenacting the investigation with original documents. Viewers nationwide learned of a woman who vanished in 1952 and was found through 21st century technology. Experts viewed the Hartwell case as a benchmark for evidence preservation and recovery. At the conference, the FBI listed it among the top 10 national cold cases, alongside Philadelphia's Boy in the Box and Florida's Walker family homicide. The FBI's summary report stated, Case hash 1473 underscores the importance of continuous evidence custody, even under the technical limitations of the last century. The New York State Police subsequently received additional funding for the Cold Case DNA Initiative, expanding its scope to re-examine at least 1,000 old cases within 3 years. The case's societal impact extended beyond forensics. State legislatures began discussing mandatory periodic reviews of untested evidence and establishing dedicated DNA archives for unresolved cases. Law schools and police academies adopted the Hartwell file as teaching material on evidence preservation protocols. A subcommittee, the Hartwell Protocol Committee, was formed within New York's Judicial Council to study biological sample preservation standards and propose long-term management policies. For Beacon's community, the case's resolution reshaped collective memory. The Hudson Valley Herald republished a photo of the Route 9D bridge with the headline, "After 49 years, Justice Crosses the Hudson." The town mayor erected a small plaque near the bridge, inscribed, "In memory of the Eleanor Hartwell case, proof that truth is never lost." The simple dedication ceremony, attended by a few dozen locals, was the first public mention of Eleanor's name in nearly half a century. In NYPD training materials, Case hash 1473 became a foundational lesson for the Evidence Preservation and Forensic Continuity course. Trainees viewed images of the original paper envelope, O'Neill's signed seal, and comparisons with modern protocols. On the Albany Police Academy's teaching screen, the final report's note was bolded, "Hartwell case proof that justice has no expiration." The 2003 State Police Summary Report noted that post-Hartwell cold case reopenings tripled. Over 10 other cases statewide were solved through DNA analysis of old evidence, including one in Rochester from 1964 and another in Syracuse from 1959. Experts dubbed this the Hartwell effect, a historic case spurring systemic investigative reform. For Ava Moreno, who initiated the case's revival, it was more than a professional triumph, it symbolized investigative faith. In a Forensic Science Weekly interview, she said, "What moved me wasn't the analysis results, but that this case showed those before us did the right things, not knowing who they'd help. They preserved evidence, not for technology, but for duty." In December that year, the New York Prosecutor's Office published an official list of resolved cold cases. Case hash 1473 bore a brief note, status, solved. May 2001 confirmed by court, March 2002. Below in smaller text, Eleanor Hartwell, Beacon, New York, 1952. Next to it was the DNA resolved designation, reserved for cases solved through DNA technology. By year's end, a state broadcast's final image showed the Route 9D bridge from above, the Hudson flowing quietly in the sunset. The narrator read slowly, a case nearly half a century old, an old paper envelope, and a name restored. For Beacon's residents, Eleanor Hartwell's story was not just a case's end, but proof that truth, however deeply buried, finds its way back. The Eleanor Hartwell case is not merely a closed criminal report after half a century, but a profound reminder for today's American society of the value of persistence, justice, and professional duty. In an era where information is created and lost in seconds, the image of a 1952 paper envelope, properly sealed and still holding DNA traces that solved a case, symbolizes the importance of preserving truth, no matter how small. Officers like Jack O'Neill lacked modern technology but possessed a rare quality, meticulousness, and professional integrity. That, combined with Ava Moreno and her forensic team's efforts, bridged two eras, delivering justice for a woman thought forgotten. In today's America, where the justice system grapples with thousands of unresolved cases and wrongful convictions, the Hartwell story reminds us that justice isn't automatic. It's built on detail, perseverance, and the ethics of those within the system. It also reflects that every small act, like proper archiving or honest note-taking, can become a thread linking past to present. The lesson isn't just for investigators, but for all. In any work, accuracy, patience, and a sense of communal responsibility form the foundation of trust. As the Beacon case proved, truth may lie dormant for decades, but it never dies. It waits for those dedicated enough to awaken it. Thank you for following the Eleanor Hartwell case, proof that justice may come late, but never lost. Subscribe to our channel to explore more cold cases where truth still awaits awakening.